Hello, welcome to my latest Diorama build, and today I thought I'd get rid of some of the scrap I've been accumulating and make good use of it by building a crazy medieval high-rise block of flats. I've only got a vague idea what I'm going to do, and I'll just throw some stuff together and see what happens, and hopefully you'll enjoy coming along for the ride. The whole idea of this building is it starts off with a small footprint, and over time people have just built up on top of it. So I fancy a very small base, and I got an idea of an arch through it, as it's been built on a very small plot of land with a road through the middle of it, and we'll end up with some sort of vertical urban sprawl. Amongst the rubbish, I've been collecting old cardboard tubes with the hope they'll become useful, and with medieval structures I do like a round tower, so this is the perfect time to give it a go. I just make a template for a simple arch, and using the old folding a piece of paper in half to get it perfect symmetrical, and simple template to cut the opening. I later give up on using the foam cutter as it was proving too slow, and a Stanley knife with the blade drawn all the way out worked really well. I decided to wrap the base tower in a thin film of foam. Say that 4 times. As I imagined I was going to carve a brick texture into it, but I later decided I was going to give it a basic texture, so I didn't need to do this. But that's what happens when you freestyle it rather than planning, but it's all part of the fun, so it doesn't matter. While I've got these thin foam sheets available, I'm going to use it for building trim round door frames and window frames and the stairs leading up on this bottom section, as it's all going to be made out of stone and I can carve some of that detail into it. The upper half of the building will be more timber framed, so there'll be lots of Bolsa used there instead. I thought it might not be structurally sound to glue the arch piece directly onto the foam of the tower, so I'm cutting that bit out and gluing directly onto the cardboard tube. I'm using my new favourite glue, tacky glue. It holds about the same as regular PVA, but while it's wet, its extreme sticky nature does a better job of holding things in place while it dries. Here I'm continuing with the lower level details, and I've decided to add a Bolsa door, and to bed it further into the foam and not just sit on the surface, I cut a grid pattern into the foam with a scalpel and then use tweezers to just rip those pieces out. You can get quite a decent flat surface doing this, but in this case the door's going to cover all the irregularities up, so it doesn't matter. I've added all the details I can think of for the moment, so now the goal is to plan out all the brickwork using a white pencil, and I want to go for a slightly irregular pattern. Once I'm happy with how it looks, I use a scalpel to trace all the lines, cutting fairly deeply into the foam, and after that using some sort of sharp object, and here I find the propelling pencil with a very hard leg does a good job of opening up all the cut lines, paying attention to the corners where you have to round them all off, which can be a very time consuming process. I'm always constantly amazed at how well this foam rock carving method works. The early stages don't look so great, but the end result, genius whoever thought of it in the first place. I'm now giving some thought to the upper stories, and with that I need some thicker blocks of foam, so I grab some suitable offcuts and glue them together with foam based Gorilla Glue. Remembering for this glue to work properly, you need to spray a little bit of water to activate it. I want to incorporate the tower to this piece, so I mark and cut away some of the cardboard tube ready for butting up to the block I've just made. Still haven't got a clear vision of what's going to go on above. I need to give it a bit more thought. Now I'm starting to imagine the upper floors are going to need some sort of structure for it to sit on, and it'd be nice to make that structure a little bit wider so I can incorporate some balconies. The railings of the balconies I will leave to the very end, as I imagine they'll get in the way all the way up to painting, and I'll probably knock them all off several times. So absolute last thing on this project will be putting the banisters up. So with that, get some supporting structure in place out of Bolsa and plank the whole thing and see what it looks like. The tacky glue is really good for gluing the Bolsa to the foam. The only hassle is it takes a while to dry. So wherever I can glue Bolsa to Bolsa, I'll just use super glue. I could use foam safe super glue for everything, but it's a little expensive and I've run out. And I'm quite liking the tacky glue anyway, so it's not a problem. The top bit needs to conform to the shape of the base, so a little bit of trimming is necessary. Nothing needs to be pristine, as all the foam of the upper floors will be covered. The base of the tower needs a bit of detail, so I found this smaller diameter cardboard tube and I'll see what I can make with it. Some Bolsa fins seem appropriate, probably for structural support, but maybe the inhabitants are secretly building a rocket, who knows. I've decided to extend the balcony area, so more sticks are required, or rather floor joists, as they might be called. Now to add the janky, badly thought out planking. So I just have to cut myself some Bolsa strips, not caring too much that they're all uniform width, as I imagine these people are just using what they've got to hand, and since it's Bolsa to Bolsa, it shouldn't take too long. All the while I was doing the bottom part, my mind's been on what the hell I'm going to do at the top, and I couldn't get a clear view of what I actually was going to do at the top. So I decided I'm just going to cut random foam blocks, glue them all together in a bit of a heap, and see how it turns out. The rationale for this is the people living there have just added stories and odd rooms, and just bolted them on here and there, or not bolted, but run large chunks of wood here and there, making the whole thing very top heavy. Just as well it's a brick base or a stone base. The eagle-eyed among you may have noticed I've changed from gluing the foam with Gorilla Glue to just sticking it all together with a hot glue gun. I like the Gorilla Glue, but you do need to wait it as it dries, because it's foam based and it expands. If you put a small amount on, you might get away with it, but then you have to wait quite a while, quite a few hours for it to set, whereas the glue gun is instant. Although I am amazed about how many glue sticks it uses. It seems to eat it at an alarming rate. Just as well they're quite cheap. I must admit this whole process is quite fun, not having to precisely measure everything and constantly checking that everything's looking like the reference. It's quite freeing, and imagining that the original builders were not fantastically skilled, as they weren't working on palace for the highborn, makes all the imperfections and things not lining up properly all parts of the atmosphere. I want interlocking and different level pitch roofs at the very top, and they're not too difficult to do when you're not being precious about it. Cut away too much and you can always jam an extra bit of foam in the gap, happy in the knowledge that all the crimes will be hidden with later stages. Plus I've decided to add a bit of leftover round cardboard for some sort of area at the top the inhabitants can use. The hardest part is knowing when to stop adding bits. It's already about twice the size as I initially envisioned when I started, which is going to make the next stage take a lot longer. So I apologise if the video becomes quite delayed, but hopefully it'll make a more interesting diorama at the end of it. Now I've made the upper area a lot bigger than I anticipated. I think it's going to need some major structural supports. So I'm going to add bracing all around underneath the balcony area. So all that's needed is a bit of on-the-fly balsa cutting and good old tacky glue. Now we have the long tedious task of covering the foam in strips of balsa to indicate the timber frame construction of the whole building. Again, I'm not going with any great plan, just starting at one corner and adding the strips, doors, windows as I go and see where it all takes me. It's a matter of putting some headphones on, listening to some music, a podcast or an audiobook, and I find this way I can go on for hours. Which is just as well, because I hate to think how many hours it actually took. I know it was over about 2 weeks to do the whole thing. The windows are going to be a simple little box structure that I'm gluing together away from the building and then just plonking it in place. I've already excavated the foam behind the window to give it some depth, and the idea is to then paint that cavity in black so you can't notice there's no real room behind it. I'm not going to glaze the windows at all because I think the owners of this building are far too poor for that, so they'll have to make do with a blanket over the window when it's too cold. With the overhang, I thought it'd be nice to have some sort of decoration hanging from it, and I'm imagining the occupants having some sort of delusions of grandeur and wanting to add a bit of decoration that looks like it came off a castle. I'm sure there's a name for this sort of decoration for castle architecture, but I've no idea what it is. Finally, the timber framing has finished, and now I can get on to the next extremely repetitive task, the tiling. But first I need a base for the tiles to be stuck to, and I'm using construction card that I'll offer up to the roof area and cut it all on the fly. I'm using a new glue I found in the shops made by Pritt of Pritt stick fame. It's based on PVA, and to my mind it's a bit like a runnier version of tacky glue. I made a little test with it and the results seem to be just as strong as tacky glue, but you have to be a bit careful because it seems to have a more watery content which can make the part warp and bend a bit more if you're not careful. For about a year now I've been collecting these cheese boxes of French camembert, and I've done this because I thought the wooden box would make a fantastic material for tiling rather than going out and buying sheets of veneer. But to my horror, on closer inspection, it's not wood at all. It's just cardboard with a printed wood texture on it, and it's not any cardboard, it's really weak, tears easy rubbish cardboard. So without the hassle of ordering some sheets of veneer and waiting for that to arrive, I'm just going to use the same construction card as I did the base. On my last tiling operation, I used the laser cutter to cut all the tiles out, but that was mostly because for that job I had a chamfer on the bottom corners of each tile. But for this build, the scale's a lot smaller and I'll just need plain rectangles, so cutting them out the old-fashioned way will be fine. Now, I've said before, I always go for this slow method of putting tiles on a building because I really like the natural randomness it causes, especially for a building like this where nothing's pristine and everything's a bit wonky. And I quite like putting some music on and methodically plonking the tiles on one by one. The next task, and it's the one I've been dreading, is to fill in between all the timber framing with some sort of filler or plaster of Paris. But just before I do that, I want to give all the Bolsa framing a quick grey-brown wash. When I plaster in between, a lot of it will end up over the top of the Bolsa, making it a very similar colour. So darkening it all down makes it much more obvious for later painting. Right, it's decision time. Polyfiller or plaster of Paris? I went with polyfiller as I'm familiar with it, and I have a feeling the plaster of Paris would settle to be beautifully smooth, which might be great if that's what you wanted, but I didn't want a perfect surface. I wanted to be a few dips and holes and just basically badly placed, as fits with the whole theme. It's a bit of a daunting prospect as there's so many little tiny areas to fill and smooth to the same depth as the Bolsa. But no excuses, just get on with it. I've decided to put the whole thing on a elliptical base. I thought that contrasted with everything else being so square and blocky. And to that base I'll glue some foam so I can give the ground a little bit of contouring. And I want to drop the whole building into that foam base a little so as to make it look like it really is a part of the landscape and not just plonked on top. There's nothing worse than gaps underneath a building to make it look fake. A quick going over with a brass brush, and it makes an easy indentation to indicate where a path's going to be, as this building, so short of space, has been built across the main road into town. A quick covering of muddy brown all over the base will get rid of the blue, and should any of it poke through in the end, it'll just look like dirt. While the paint is still wet, a quick sprinkling of chinchilla sand makes a good starting point for the path. A quick paint of the foam parts of the lower part of the building with black, and while that dries I take another browny grey wash and re-establish all the lines of the timber framing. Next I take a dark blue colour and base paint all the roofing. Green can work quite well, but I thought I'd give blue a go this time. Now the black base on the lower part of the building has dried, I pick out the individual stones with various shades of warm greys. I think warm greys work better than cold greys for stonework, but I paint the various shades at random all over, and you've got to be mindful of later stages will knock this all back, so you have to be a bit garish at this stage. Go for bigger variations of colour than you really want. Everything that's not wood, stone or plaster, I'm giving a coat of beige or various shades of beige because I'll make it a bit patchy. Now I made the roof far too dark, so instead of a light dry brushing as I'd normally do, I've gone for a really aggressive one where the paint's a little bit dry but still enough wet in there to give good coverage. I think the white of the plaster is a bit too pristine, especially for this poorly maintained building, so I'll give a yellowy wash over the whole thing. On other projects I've used tile grout to fill in the mortar lines, but I thought I'd try something different this time, as this is a bit smaller scale. So I've got myself some acrylic modelling paste, and it's come out a little thinner than I had imagined, but I'll give it a go, and I'll push it into the mortar cracks with a silicone modelling tool. It'll be interesting to see how it turns out. I'm going to dry brush some white in various places where the yellow wash got a little bit over the top, and I think I'll mostly do it in the centres of the plaster areas, leaving the yellow in the corners. It just occurred to me that there needs to be a path from the front door to the main road, so a quick dab of glue and some more sprinkled chinchilla sand and job done. Quite a while ago now I bought this cheap static grass applicator, and guess what? You get what you pay for. It's complete junk. So I then went out and bought a much more expensive version from a known supplier, and guess what? It works perfectly. So I cover the area I want the grass to land with PVA glue, making sure I don't make the edges of the path too sharp. Then load up the static grass machine thingy with 2mm static grass. Switch on, bit of a shake, and within seconds, job's done. All the grass nicely standing up in place. Whereas when I attempted the complete rubbish of no known origin applicator, all the grass just laid on its side. There was no static charge whatsoever. And now the thing I've been putting off for a long time, joining the two halves of the building together. There's no going back after this. After the glue connecting to the two halves of the building had dried thoroughly, I decided for extra security I'm going to shove a skewer right through the two halves. After a bit of a sidetrack, I'm finally able to do the dirt washes. So a heavily watered down black with a little bit of brown wash. I just slap it all over, let it drip, and very easily and quickly you end up with what looks like years of grime. Looking at the massive overhang of the building on the right hand side, I thought it'd need some kind of bracing. So a quick bit of Bolsa cutting and some good old tacky glue. I made these asymmetrical braces that the local inhabitants didn't give it much thought and just slapped them on. Right, I think I'm finally safe to put the railings on. I've left these right to the end as I was convinced I'd constantly knock them off and break them if I had done it earlier. Plus it would have been very difficult to paint behind. So anyway, the idea is to make the uprights out of cocktail sticks. So I've cut a load to size and then super glued them in place, which end up surprisingly strong, and then simply cut a Bolsa handrail and glue that in position. Job done. All these new bare bits of wood get the dirty wash treatment to tie them into everything else. I've decided the grass is a bit too uniform in colour and a little bit too bright, so it's a simple matter of just digging the airbrush out and spraying some random darker greens all over. And now it's just a matter of marrying the building to the base and gluing in some undergrowth, particularly where the building meets the ground, so it helps with the building looking like it really is attached to the ground with some weight, and calling it done. Well, this project took considerably longer than I anticipated, largely due to the fact that it got quite a bit larger than my original thoughts. But I do hope you enjoyed watching, and if you like this sort of medieval diorama building stuff, I'll link to another one right now. Go on, click on it, you know you want to. Goodbye, and I hope to see you on the next video. Thanks for watching.